sessions so that we can upload them to the stimulus site. And we also Facebook Live these too, so just forewarning of that too. Got it. All right. So yeah, so welcome everybody. My name is Natasha Turner. I am the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs. Really happy to be here with everybody today. And I'll start with a land acknowledgement. And so also I'd like to welcome our international guests. And so maybe people internationally don't, fully understand what a land acknowledgement is or why we do it. So basically a territorial acknowledgement or land acknowledgement involves making a statement recognizing the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples who called this land home before the arrival of settlers. So beyond that, I'd also like to acknowledge that as a national organization, our work takes place throughout Turtle Island, which is, as I previously said, the ancestral, unceded, and in some cases ceded lands of the Indigenous peoples. I personally want to acknowledge that I live, work, and play in the land of Mi'kmaq, which is the traditional and ancestral territory of, and unceded territory, of the Mi'kmaq people. So I guess I'll just give you like an overview of how things are going to go today and sort of about the event. So if you've not participated in one of our events previously, Stimulus is a program and collaboration between the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition and my organization, which is the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs. And so therefore, I'd like to welcome everybody to the premiere of our spotting video to this Stimulus Connect. So we have a few planning committee members who are here helping out in the background, and they'll all just give us a wave. So we have Nick, has he joined back in with us? He'll be doing simultaneous French-English interpretation. Savannah is going to be watching the chat. Shay is doing background tech and watching the Q&A as always, and she's pretty fabulous. She goes back and forth from the chat to the Q&A. So I don't mean to throw you under the bus there, Shay, but you're pretty awesome at doing this. And I'm going to be your moderator. So today, please, if you have a moment to introduce yourself and put your pronouns and where you're from in the chat so that we can all, sort of have this conversation and let everybody know where we're from and who we are. We have over 150 people registered for this event, which is really exciting. And a few housekeeping. One, we're using the hashtag StimulusConnect on Twitter mostly, but I mean all other platforms as well. We welcome questions in the chat in either French or English. Question for the panelists should go into the Q&A box that's right down at the bottom of your screen. So it's really helpful if you put them in the Q&A so that people don't have to transfer them from the chat back over to the Q&A. And also people can upvote on the questions that come in so that we know which are the most popular to ask the panelists to speak to. This event, as I've already mentioned, is being recorded and will be available on the Stimulus website in the future. And as I also mentioned, we're on Facebook Live. If you're having problems with sound going in and out, turn off the oral interpretation when you do not need it. We have folks joining us today from all across Canada, I'm happy to say, in small communities and large, but we also have international guests. We have Scotland, Slovenia, Spain, and people from the US of A. So we have a very well-rounded attendees today. So I'll sort of speak to the order of the speakers, but also give a brief overview of the project and explain the spotting project in this video. So this collaboration came about with CAPUD and the University of Toronto, and Carol's sort of there in the background, but she's an amazing researcher that came to us and said, hey, do you want to do any research? And so Matt and I were like, hell yeah, we want to do this virtual consumption stuff. So the project sort of went from there, and we have a fabulous team that involves obviously Cassandra, Natalie, and Matthew, but also Katie, members from the Dr. Peter Center, Corey Ranger, and Mary Lou Ganong. So we had a really encompassing team of different organizations and different researchers. So I know we've gotten questions previous to this on what is spotting. So I'll briefly explain what spotting is. Spotting is a community-driven response to the current overdose crisis, which really stems from drug prohibition. It represents a remote method of supervising drug consumption, or just being there for somebody who needs somebody to, be there with them while they're using. Considering that, services for safe consumption and OPS are very limited and in very city central areas, and not all people have access to those. So what we're going to go over today is what we call an informal spotting. So informal spotting individuals here and after we'll say is considered spottees. First begins with a person who reaches out to either somebody else who uses drugs, a friend, a family member, or another connection through a virtual method, which can include a phone call, social media app, or like video call through Skype, Messenger, or wherever the individual decides to connect from. When initiating a call, the spottee discloses pertinent information as to their location and the type of substances being used. This is also a period where the spottees discuss their overdose response plan with spotters, including who they would like to have call if there's an emergency situation were to occur. And also represents a period of time where spotters can provide pertinent information such as consumption methods. And so the spottee actually consuming the substances while they are connected to the spotter. And I know the spotter stuff is kind of confusing for some people, but it's basically just the virtual or phone call presence of people while they're using drugs. So, and generally after that, the spotter will stay on the call the spotter will stay on the call for around 15 minutes post-use to ensure safety. The video will demonstrate like a step-by-step overview and necessary components one must take into consideration if you want to offer informal spotting in your community. So further to that, after the video plays, we'll have Cassandra, who goes by she, her, and Natalie Kaminsky, they, them, sort of talk about their making the video, going through the script. Finally, we'll have Matt, who goes by he, him, talk about knowledge products and other services available, that we've developed throughout the project. And we'll be showing the video in English today. However, we will put the French one into the chat. As well, we have comic strips as well. So if there's people that, have a disability, are unable to hear, we have other types of things that people can read so that it is attainable to a wider audience. And yeah, so I will kick it off to the video. Just let me open this up. And I have to share the screen. Sorry, this is here. Down. And here we go.
Hi, Corey. I just grabbed some down and I don't want to use alone. Will you spot me?
No problem. Let's come up with the plan. Where are you at right now, Alex?
The address here is 321 Bronte Street, Unit 503. The closest intersection is 2nd Avenue and 3rd Street. I'm using in my living room.
Okay, what drugs are you using and how are you planning on using them?
I just grabbed some down and I'm smoking it. It's a new batch, a new color, so I'm a bit nervous. Do you have 15 minutes to stay on the phone while I smoke?
Absolutely. Who am I going to call in case of an overdose?
You can call my neighbor Sam at 666-555-1234.
If I call them and they can't get there in time, are you okay with me sharing your information with EMS?
Yes, you can call EMS. I just don't want the police here.
I can't guarantee the police won't show up if I have to call EMS, but you may want to put away anything you wouldn't want them or the police to see. The Good Samaritan law should protect you from being arrested if you overdose, but it doesn't protect you from being charged for other reasons. Do you have naloxone on you?
Yeah, there is a kit that hangs on my hook by my front door, and Sam, my neighbor, also has some.
Okay, you should put away any pets and make sure your front door is unlocked.
OMG, thanks for reminding me.
Okay, I can't see you. I would feel better if you turned your camera on. That way I know you're okay.
Okay, I'm turning on the camera. Give me a minute to set my shit up. So I just put 1/4 of a point on foil. Just put the rest of my package away. One sec. Okay, now I'm going to smoke. Okay, I think I feel okay.
You feeling all right?
Yeah, if you could stay on the line for a little while longer, that would be great.
I'm happy to do that. Where do you get your gear from? Alex, can you hear me? Alex, how are you feeling right now? Alex, I need you to answer me. Are you there? Alex, if you don't answer me, I'm gonna have to call your neighbor or EMS.
Oh,
Hey, there you are. Can you say something to me, please? Okay, I'm calling your neighbor to see where he is. Alex, talk to me. Alex. Hey, Sam. I'm one of Alex's friends. She asked me to monitor her while she was using down. She's not doing great. Okay, one sec. I'll try again. Alex, I'm on the phone with Sam. Are you with me, Alex? Alex, answer me. No answer. Sam, can you get here right away? No. Okay, I'm gonna call EMS. Hi, I'm calling you because my friend has overdosed. 321 Bronte Street, apartment 503, intersection 2nd Ave and 3rd Street. Yeah, the door's unlocked and their dog is away. Please hurry. This video presents one scenario. People react in many ways to drug use. For more information about the overdose crisis, overdose education, naloxone distribution, harm reduction services, and any other information, connect with your local harm reduction program and any of the below. We dedicate this video to all the people who have been lost to the overdose epidemic and the pioneers who spot to keep their community alive.
Sorry about that, guys. I realized that the annotated, I don't know how the red marks get on there. I assure you those aren't on the original video. Technical difficulties, oh my God. Anyway, the videos do not have the red marks on it. I do apologize about that. Anyway, we have Natalie and Cassandra here, and we'll share both links inside of the chat as well for people to look at the ones that didn't have, I don't know how that happened, but some red marker stuff went all over it. But anyway, yes, please, Cassandra is here, she, her, as I mentioned earlier, and Natalie Kaminsky, they, them. And yeah, so they're sort of going to walk us through the steps of the project that they took on and talk about the video scripts and that itself. So thanks. Have the floor, guys.
Hey, everybody. You might recognize our voices as we were the background characters also in the video. So my name is Natalie. I was brought onto the project as a researcher. So I got to do the work from the very beginning on the project, interviewing people, reviewing all of the data that we got back in and theming. So when it took time to start doing the video and start producing a script, I've been a spotter for folks, as well as I'm a person who uses drugs and I've been spotted. I've worked with Cassandra. Both of us have worked in the harm reduction field also. So when it came time to make the video and create characters, I reached out to Cassandra and we basically talked through some of the scenarios that we see both in our personal life and in work, as well as the types of community members that we work with and often support in these scenarios. So Cassandra and myself spent a lot of time coming together to make characters, and then applying community like knowledge and lived experience to those characters, so that they were reflective of people we support, people that support us. Yeah, I don't know, Cassandra, do you want to talk maybe about the character that you were in the video?
Your sound's not working there, Cassandra.
Hi,
Okay.
it's me. Cassandra, go out. I'll give you a link and come back in. What happened is that the folks have come in with the moderator link, have all been somehow identified as translators. So I'm going to give you another link. Sorry about that, friend.
Sounds good. Natalie,
I can continue.
yeah, you and I could talk briefly sort of about the project if you'd like. So
Sure.
Until she comes back in, sort of about you and Matt eventually doing the coding and all of those pieces as well, which was really amazing that you guys took that on.
Yeah, so as I said, I'd been on the project from the beginning point, so I got to see the project really from conception to realization, which is like the materials that we produced and shared today. So throughout the process, like I lived, breathed, and slept spotting. And so all of the information that I remembered people saying to us and the scenarios that people had described to us had gone into the thinking of creating this video and applying these themes. But we also wanted to make sure in creating this video that it was able to be used as step-by-step for folks to be able to look at some of the main components of what being a good spotter for somebody would entail some of those critical points, right? Like getting somebody's address, making sure that they're aware that, police may attend, making sure that their pets are away. And in spotting, this study really focused on informal networks, which is like Natasha and I are friends. So I use Natasha or my neighbor or those types of connections where people already have trust built with somebody. So we wanted to make sure that, sorry, with some of my pals, sorry, just read somebody's message. We wanted to make sure that what we were producing was going to support people that maybe already knew each other and just wanted to have that open conversation on how to become a spotter or how to get somebody to spot for you.
And I remember when the Facebook group first started, like this started even before COVID. We had this remember the private Facebook group that we had where we had people all across the country join into that to sort of start spotting in their community. But there was no rhyme or reason to it. We didn't have a script. So everybody was doing it different. And I think, from my perspective, this project, and now with the video especially, is going to show people the steps that they need to take to ensure that there's safety for both the person who's responding the call, but also for the other individual that is on the receiving end, I guess, of the service, so that you can explain those steps. And I will jet out now so that you and Cassandra can take over. I'm glad that you made it back, Cassandra.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. So we're at the point where we're just talking about kind of the steps in spotting. So in the video, we wanted to represent a friendship that was pre-existing, somebody reaching out. In this case, Cassandra's character reached out to my character and said, like, I got this dope and it doesn't look familiar to me and I need some support. And so in the video, we wanted to show like step by step, but also how natural it is for people to support each other in this way, because that's what we saw represented in our research. I don't know, Cassandra, do you want to talk about maybe even just how that functions in communities that you support? Because we were quite intentional about wanting to represent some of the most marginalized folks in community, including, lower income communities, ACB communities, as well as 2S LGBTQ plus communities.
Yeah, and I think when we were working on the script, we were also considering the fact that not everyone has access to a supervised consumption site, a site where someone can be present when you're using. So the reality is, and especially with COVID, that it just increased the likelihood that someone would be using alone. And when I'm doing my work, I've found that a lot of folks, they use in the closet. They're not so much, they're not open and as forthcoming about their use. So it would usually maybe just be a neighbor that would know, as opposed to a family member or someone that they work with. So that dialogue could really be a realistic conversation where, as in Alex and Corey's situation, they've already kind of checked off the boxes in terms of the safety plan. Alex was telling Corey, it's a new batch. They told them what they're using. Corey reminded Alex to keep the dog in a safe place. So these were components of the safety plan that we had incorporated in the script so that, one, it could seem natural, but we're also covering all aspects to ensure that it's a comfortable situation for both folks, right? You're asking someone what they need in order for them to be spotted, but the person doing the spotting also has to let the person know, well, look, I need to know the number or name of your closest neighbor or someone that can come before I call EMS, or if that, are you comfortable with me calling EMS? And then having that conversation where even Alex mentioned, I don't want the police here. But then, Corey saying the reality is the police might be on site, right? So just to ensure that you put away the things that you might be concerned about. So I think the script development, I think it took a lot of time because we wanted it to have that we wanted it to reflect what we've experienced in our work, but also what we experience in the dialogues that folks have with us, right? These are situations that are real, they're happening right now. People are using in isolation, and we look at virtual spotting or remote spotting as an overdose prevention method so that we're just ensuring that folks are safe. We're looking at all options that we can explore.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point around even around the substances that we chose to use and the method in which people were using them. That was a huge thing that we heard in our study, where people spoke a lot about the fact that they don't have access because smoking is such an issue when it comes to finding a site. I believe there's one in Canada that's functionally running right now. I think we had two prior to that. But yeah, we constantly heard people talking about not having access or even not feeling comfortable around going to a site. Everything from people not wanting others to know down to safe consumption sites just not being a safe space for folks. So yeah, I think those were some of also the things that we took into consideration around the overdose. We wanted to make sure that in the video, we showed a scenario where the person that was given as like the responder in community, sometimes that person's not going to be available.
Right.
And that's a reality. And so we need to move on to like the next step. And it's not like calling a list of people, which oftentimes, you know, somebody may say like no EMS at all, here's 4 numbers, but you really need to make that call when is somebody's safety at risk and you can no longer, you know, try contacting other people to come in. And I saw earlier in the chat somebody say that they often spot for folks, but they drive to respond or they go to respond for that person. And we also heard that. So spotting can take on very different forms in the way that people set up their safety plan. And this was just like one scenario that we wanted to show. I'm trying to think of what else we did in the video or talking about spotting in our in communities that we work with.
I think another component of the video that I was really happy about was the representation, the visual representation. People use drugs. Usually when you look at images that are put out into the media, they look like one particular person. Right. So when we're trying to, you know, educate folks that are from different parts of Africa, different parts of the Caribbean, in the work that I do at Black Cap, we found that some people say, well, substance use, well, that's not something that we can relate to. It is something that people of color, people of different backgrounds and different cultures do engage in. So we shouldn't look at it as a black and white issue. We should address it as something that we all need to respond to and understand that people, you know, people cope with. So at the end of the day, there was something that just, it really hit home to me to see someone that looked like me in an animation, in a comic, in something that's harm reduction related. We're looking at the fact that people need to see themselves in situations to relate to them. And the sad reality is we're losing a lot of people throughout the pandemic, but we've been losing people throughout this overdose crisis for a number of years. And there's still that lack of awareness within certain communities that it's a situation that we all need to respond to. Having an naloxone kit on site in your workplaces, having that neighbor that has an naloxone kit, even though people might not use in that unit, they might use on that floor. And just that community, that sense of responsibility that folks can have where they can take on a piece of the puzzle. They can take on a part of that community response. I think this is going to be a great way to drive that message in, especially in our outreach and our education material, because there just needs to be a lot more of that conversation being had. And people will continue to use in silence and be isolated and not have access to resources they need unless we find really creative ways to relay information. And I think this is something that, yeah, I'm just really proud of being a part of. And I hope that people see this as something that they can add to their tools of engagement, their resources, and their material that they distribute and share with folks virtually and in person.
I see some points coming in about the wording that we used when calling EMS, saying overdose versus unresponsive. And like we said, this script was something that we spent a lot of time with, going back and forth on, but we did in our the original script was done between myself and Corey Ranger. It was done quickly for a presentation. And then we took that script and we kept adapting it and applying our characters and changing things. And we did want to show something that realistically looks like an overdose in terms of the way in which people are responding, the way in which people behave. But in the notes, we did carefully outline what the criminalization of people who use drugs can do when it comes to sending EMS on site and some of those considerations. But I think the script was something that was done quite naturally between Cassandra and I, but the original script was done with Corey Ranger and myself and really mimicked somebody who was new to spotting getting their footing around how to behave in a spotting scenario, because oftentimes it's a crisis moment and people make these decisions on how to react, and there's always going to be like a better way, a more thoughtful way, and we tried to put those considerations into our, what are those called when they slide on after the picture, like our decks after. Yeah, I'm not sure if Matt's ready to pop on, but I know that Matt is going to be talking about some of the materials that were created, as well as like some next steps, I guess, that occurred after the research was completed and themed. So take it away, Matt.
Can I just say something? I wanted to thank you both for your hard work on this. And Cassandra, you made some really excellent points. We hear often from our board members, like Frank and Michael, how there's not a lot of representation of the ACB community and resources. So I really wanted to thank you for highlighting that. And, you know, also the team, you guys did amazing work on these videos. And then with the French video as well, we had Anne-Marie Houston, which is one of our CAPUD staff, do the voiceover for that, as well as Alexandra I can never pronounce her last name properly, right? She's going to kill me. Alexandra Dequit, I guess is how you pronounce it. But yeah, so there's been a lot of work gone into this. I just thank you both for your hard work on this and putting, you know, your efforts and time into making sure that we got this right. So thank you both. And now, Matt, I'll kick it off to you.
Hi, everyone, and hopefully everyone can hear me now, and I'm not muted, and I'm seeing some nods, so that's great. And you know, I just want to thank Cassandra and Nat, and really to follow up from what they shared. We went into this process looking at informal spotting to hear from people in Ontario and Nova Scotia, acknowledging that there were a lot of people in BC that may have been spotting, but you know, knowing that they have more comprehensive kind of stakeholders in place and organizations in place that may be able to take on some research related to this. So we wanted to look at the East Coast and Ontario. We went into it with a small budget, but you know, so much knowledge and expertise from a wide variety of stakeholders, including people who use drugs, academic researchers, students, registered nurses, medical doctors, and other key stakeholders. So through this project, we created several knowledge products, including the video that everyone just watched for the first time. We have that in Canada's both official languages, English and French, uploaded on CAPUD's YouTube channel. We also have the videos broken down into graphic comic books, into PDFs that are on CAPUD's website, and that can be shared so people can print them out and kind of like, you know, maybe hand them out to someone if somebody wanted to read them and you know, have kind of a informal script if they were going to be starting this. Along with that, we also had 2 peer-reviewed academic publications that came out of this, one in the Digital Health Journal and one in the Harm Reduction Journal, and various media articles published both in Canada and the US. We've had an article written and published on Katie, one written and published in Filter. The University of Toronto actually interviewed Carol and Natalie to talk about some of this amazing work that we have been doing. And I think, you know, it's important, and you know, and Natalie touched on it, but we wanted to make sure that we were creating products for people to be able to start informal spotting without a whole lot of work. And I know I checked in with my personal spotter once we uploaded the video, and I shared it with him. And I just, you know, asked, like, was there anything that was missing or whatnot? And he said no, he thought the video was great. And he said that he's had this conversation with me many times. My overdose response plan always had kind of somebody in the house as the first contact for him to call with naloxone available, and then following up with emergency services if they don't answer, with an address and a location for the person. So, you know, and he was very specific. He'd always ask me to take my camera off. He'd ask me what I was using, if I was using any other substances. And this individual has spotted me across Canada and actually into the US. So, you know, this is something that can be implemented and normalized in your community to really make sure that people never have to use alone.
You done, Matt, there? Let me show my camera back on. Yeah, I think Carol just made a good point there. Shout out to Sarah Harst for the animation. They did an amazing job with the animation and worked with our team and, you know, made modifications along the way. So I think we're all really proud of both of the videos and the comic strips, that had come out of it. I'm looking onto my schedule here because Shay gives me an annotated agenda. So before we go into like the Q&A period, we're going to launch our anonymous poll for multiple choice questions. So Shay, if you wanted to load that up on the screen, thank you. And so while we're waiting for that, I also wanted to mention, please save the date. We are going to be having our conference for the Stimulus 2022 Drug Policy and Practice in Canada, September 28th to 30th in Ottawa, Gatineau. And so we would love to have as many of you out there that attend all of our Stimulus Connect, you know, online interventions, I guess is what you'd say. And as well as have people, you know, recommend other people within the community, like people who use drugs within your community that you work with, because, you know, Stimulus, the conference, tries to bring as many people who currently or formerly use drugs as possible, because, you know, when we're talking about drug policy, we look at it as a nothing about us without us aspect. And so we should always have people who use drugs in all of these conversations. And a lot of these initiatives should be led by us or be main stakeholders in these engagement processes. So I think, is the poll still up, Shay? We're going to give it a few more minutes. Shay?
Yeah, we're going to leave it up for a little bit.
Okay.
Sometimes people have problems finishing it. So if it won't let you press like enter, you're done, go back. You have forgotten to answer one of the 6 questions.
Yeah, and somebody just asked for a few more minutes, please, so that they can answer it. Absolutely, we can leave it up for a few more minutes. I don't want to rush anybody.
I just
through the
want to
poll.
note that Ontario is missing on the poll.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
That was a mistake, I think.
You scroll down, it's appears below.
Okay.
Yeah, there's two questions related to where you live. If your province or territory isn't in the first question, say I'm going to answer below. And if it's in the second question, then you get to say Ontario or whatever your territory is or province.
Yeah, polls only allowed so many, you know, things to answer within one space. You have to send it to the next one. Okay, so while we're doing the poll, I've given a shout out to Stimulus 22. Like I said, please save the date, and would love to see you all come, and thank you all for attending our events. All right, so should we go into the Q&A, or would you like me to still wait a couple more minutes, Shane?
They can actually happen parallel if you want. Why don't you go ahead and ask a question, and then later I can share the poll.
Okay, so the first question that I see here is, when someone wants to use drugs, is he, she willing, I would say they, them, willing to call somebody else to monitor his or her use, I guess. So I think Carol Strike wanted to answer this. So Carol, did you want to come in and answer that question? No? I thought it was you. Okay, thank you.
Oh, no, I wasn't quite sure about that technology. So I was going to say, yeah, some people do want to use their phone or their FaceTime. Some people don't. But for those who do, yeah, they will use their phones and have used their phones and like doing so.
Thanks for that. And yeah, I would say that this is something that we use at CAPUD on a regular basis for our staff. So if somebody needs spotting, whether that be they're not at work that day and they need spotting, they can call myself or another staff there. And likewise, if they're unable to work that day, but they're using a new supply or whatnot. So it's something that we've employed and, you know, firmly believe in within CAPUD, because it's a life-saving tool, and allowing people to just have not, you know, like no access to anything and being punitive about people's use is probably the wrong, I believe it's the wrong approach to take. I think my colleagues here that are on this call would say it's the wrong, you know, approach to take as well, because we can't just ignore that people that work in our organizations use substances, and therefore we should offer service to our employees to make sure that they have safe access to be able to use and have somebody to spot them. So yeah, and I'll kick it off to you guys to talk.
I just wanted to add that the wording in that question said call, and some people even use texting, right? So it doesn't have to be a phone call. Somebody will say, like, text with me, and then if I stop responding on text. We also had folks that, you know, talked about living in an apartment building and, you know, going downstairs, letting somebody know in the apartment, hey, I'm going to use right now. Come back up and check on me in 5 minutes. So, you know, for the purpose of the study, we did talk about remote methods, which often meant like using a messenger, a cell phone, you know, some sort of remote method. But spotting can take on different types of forms. The main purpose of it, I guess, the main point of spotting somebody is somebody knows you're using and is able to check up on you should you no longer become available to them in some way, respond to them, and then would contact or respond to the drug poisoning.
And you know, just to piggyback off Natalie, and acknowledging that people have been spotting long before COVID, but I think harm reduction messaging has changed during the pandemic and COVID-19. So, you know, we say never use alone, carry naloxone, use safe supplies, and, you know, maybe the messaging doesn't change. So we're saying don't use alone, but, you know, we got to provide people tips and ways to not use alone, while not maybe being able to physically be within one like distance with oneself. So I think, you know, it has really expanded, and you know, a lot more people are kind of trying to use this services, and it's also great for people in remote and rural areas that may never have access to a overdose prevention site or a supervised consumption site. So I think, yeah, there's some great ways to implement this in communities.
I just wanted to add one more thing. I think even in areas that are located within cities that are as big as Toronto. We're focusing on a neighborhood called Rexdale, and Rexdale has like limited access to community services and harm reduction programs and saw a 200% increase in overdoses in 2020. So that's a community that would definitely benefit from just having options and information such as this. And I just wanted to touch on to, I think someone had mentioned something a bit earlier about offering options for people who use drugs within their workspaces, and just having that conversation. I think managers and even boards, they need to have these resources to access as well, because these are circumstances that are taking place within many organizations, and they don't have the capacity or even policies in place to respond to them. And I think in a prevention measure, it'd be great for them to have these in place in order to respond effectively. And I think employees will feel more like, even just more welcome and understood within their workspaces. This is a challenging time for all of us to be working in and just living in. So just imagine supporting community and being, going through your own internal struggle and feeling like you have to hide that from the people you work with. I work with amazing people and I've built a community of support, but I'm one of very few. There are a lot of people who are supporting community who are battling their own substance use and using in isolation, and they need these supports as well.
Thank you for that, Cassandra. And that's a very good point, because oftentimes when people use drugs, I think we've talked about this on past webinars, they feel like when they start working in an organization, they have to deny their use or like hide their use. And so therefore, we've actually, as harm reduction organizations that embrace harm reduction, not embrace harm reduction actually for the employees within our organizations. And we put them at more risk, at more harm, and more likely to overdose because of using in isolation. So those are very good points that need to be looked at by multiple organizations throughout this country. I think we have some other questions here. Maria Scotton has said, are there any mobile safe consumption services in Canada or designated peer responders to overdose aside from spotting partners?
So I was going through that question and I saw discussions about some of the apps that are available. I do believe that right now with most of the services and apps, paramedics are a big staple, I guess, in their response plan, which in terms of uptake is scary, right? And what we saw in our project was that people like to go to people they already knew and trusted. And so that creating a service out of that is really difficult. We saw Grenfell, which knew the people who started Grenfell were from the community. People knew them in the community. And so their uptake was great in the community because people knew the faces that were answering the phones. As somebody who uses drugs, I would feel quite threatened calling a service because I am a mother who uses drugs. I'm criminalized in that way. My child can be taken from me. So it feels quite threatening. Using services, they come with policies, procedures, formalities, and some of those things often work to create greater harm, just like Natasha was talking about, like work within the work space. When you create a service, unfortunately, those things have to come into play. And so we saw people relying on community members and friends and people whose faces they knew to get support because of those things that occur when you create a service. There is a group in the North who created the dope line specifically because the responders in those communities are people that they know. And so it's a drug user group that started a line. It's to one single area. They're not funded and people know who's going to answer the phone. And I think that's really, when we're thinking about how to create a service, we need to think about those complexities and make sure that if we're going to go, say, in a certain district, like let's say I'm from the region of Peel in Mississauga, we start a line. You're going to want to have peers from Mississauga on the phone lines and to be responders so that people know who they can expect to come and support them in a drug poisoning.
Very good points, Natalie. And I think you hit on a really, hot topic there about Children's Aid Society coming in. Our program here, or what we're reviewing here, is strictly informal. This is not a formal service. And so I love all of the questions that are going in the chat, but I just wanted to highlight again that this is an informal service. And as Natalie said, there's larger implications with formal services that perhaps may have policies in place that may say, if you hear a child in the background, perhaps, and I'm not saying this about any certain site, I'm just saying in general, there may be a policy that says if you hear children in the background, it could put them at risk if somebody's using drugs there. But I mean, we know in society as people who use drugs that just because you use drugs doesn't mean you're putting your children at risk or at harm, but yet you're at threat for having them violently removed from your care because you've owed yourself as somebody who uses substances, which is a very important thing, especially for women, gender diverse individuals, parents and caregivers, right? Because they're isolated from a lot of these services as well, because they just don't trust the system or trust to be able to go into those spaces. So I just wanted to mention that. I see you came back on, Cassandra. Did you want to add to that as well?
It just brought an idea to mind. In the last stimulus I was a part of, it was harm reduction for parents and caregivers. Some folks were talking about not even understanding that there was a safety plan or something that they can offer their caseworkers or the support system, the kinship, any form of family member that's working with them and the children, to really give them support around when and how they use. And this could be something that people can introduce in conversations as well as a way that they're supported when they're using alone. This is, again, some folks would say that it's not a realistic conversation to have with child protection services, but at the same time, it is a conversation that people are having. So it's not a one-off situation where we're looking at having to implement these practices as something that's part of community service or even just person-to-person support. So I want parents to feel confident in the fact that these are life-saving and overdose prevention measures that they can access. And when they're having conversations about how are they using safely, then these are things that they can say that they've implemented and indicate what supports that they do have.
Yeah,
and
oh, go ahead. I was going to say great points.
Yeah, great points, Cassandra. And I just wanted to, piggyback off of that, because I think the great thing about informal spotting is that everybody has their own overdose response plan that they feel comfortable with, and that the spotter or the spotter and the spottee both feel comfortable with. And, you only agree to something that you really feel comfortable with, right? Maybe you are somebody that needs to visually see somebody, or you won't do it, but it's something that you kind of pick and choose between and really build a relationship between people. And, in the workplace, informal methods I found were a lot more kind of, kind of just like drug use in the community. We were talking, it wasn't really focused on the drug use. You may take a moment to use, but then you're kind of going back to chatting with the person that's on the other line, and then they can pick up really quickly if you were overdosing, compared to if you were like listening for someone's breath or whatnot, which I think we heard in some of the interviews.
I just wanted to add, as I saw Una, who is with, I believe, Brave, and Una had said that Brave does not call 911, but has responders. And so I don't want to put incorrect information out there. So I am correcting myself, and I thank Una for correcting me, because I think that that's also something that I think maybe is assumed. And so when there is services that are taking a different approach, we should put that information out there. And again, thank you for correcting me, Una. Yeah,
thanks. And thanks, Una, for putting that in the chat. And I just want to highlight again that today we're really trying to highlight informal services, more than formal services. And that's why I sort of said there may be the instance of this or there may be the instance of that. So I don't think we're speaking to any specific formal program. I just want to put that disclaimer out there. Like we're speaking solely about our project and things that we've heard through our research project. So thank you though, Una, for putting that in the chat. So I'll move on to the next question that has been upvoted. So this is Terry Morris. I've arrived late. Sorry if it was already talked about. I was wondering what people who spot people recommend for staying in it for the long haul / having support / practices / community.
You know, I think one thing that we really heard, Natasha, was around kind of like mental health and kind of having supports for maybe traumatic events that could happen. You know, like I think there was a lot of concerns of like, okay, if someone was spotting and they had to witness an overdose and, you know, they were on the line with somebody and the person, there wasn't a responsive kind of measure that, you know, they had to witness somebody that may be fatally overdosed. You know, luckily we haven't heard of any scenarios like that, but there was a lot of concerns around people. So really having supports, and I think, you know, it's, if you're going to be doing this, you want to be connecting with other people that are doing this and having a debrief method and really talking about best practices, because it's gonna variety from community to community on different substances, on different backgrounds. So I think it's really important to connect with other people that are doing this work.
Yeah, there was a lot of folks who in our study said like their greatest concern is what happens if EMS doesn't arrive on time. And that point really sat with me. And I think Matt speaks to, you know, a great point. And Natasha in the beginning said there was like this Facebook group that kind of started with people chatting about what they needed to do, or does somebody have a script? You know, how do people do this when they're spotting? And that group was really instrumental, I think, in formalizing some of these processes in the very beginning. And yeah, people also, one of our questions in the study was like, if you could do something to change or make spotting better, what would you do? And people spoke a lot about like things like this, having training so that people felt confident in what they were doing, so that they knew that they were taking the right steps. So they knew that what they were doing was the correct like method, or that had the least risk. So yeah, and debriefing, I mean, I think that I check in with my friends regularly. You know, I know what environment we're all working in, where it's the poisoning crisis has just exponentially grown, especially in COVID. And so I don't know if, you know, Bob, my buddy, spots, but I'm going to check in and see how they're doing. So if you have people in your life who use drugs, check in with them. Check in with what they're doing to keep safe, support each other. And I think that, yeah, these resources, that was the purpose of them, to provide people with somewhere to go and find that information and feel like there was some sort of method in supporting somebody.
And, you know, one other thing, Natalie, and that I think came out of the recommendations was to really have monetary support, financial support to pay people who are spotting, right? Like, because if we were putting this on, you know, the shoulders of volunteers, there's going to be a lot of compassionate burnout really quick, and, you know, people that just, we really need to be paying people for their knowledge, their expertise, and their time, because this is something that is an essential overdose response measure for multiple different perspectives and varieties of people who use drugs. But we need to be paying people for their time.
And I just wanted to mention, and tying into the training piece, that similar to harm reduction satellites that folks have in their buildings and their communities, there needs to be a component through harm reduction education that's offered by the different programs throughout the regions that Spotting is like there are resources connected to spotting where people can be trained spotters, people can have the opportunity to sit down and create their safety plan or outline what questions they'll ask in the safety plan when they're setting their limitations. OHORN has a great resource and a link that you could download also. It's called How to Remote Spot Someone Who Uses Drugs. So that actually outlines like what are your limitations, right? And setting them and when to know if this is something you can and can't do. This is really being honest with yourself about that. But in order to be prepared, I think training and having the most access to information is really important. So I think what we'll see in the coming months are harm reduction programs offering trainings and workshops about spotting, right? And giving folks the opportunity to sit down in sessions where they're trained and they have an understanding and have the opportunity to ask questions as opposed to being thrown into the situation, on a one-off, and that's traumatizing in itself. So we're trying to, and just prevent any of that from happening by giving people the most information possible. But I think it's a great link, and I think Nat, you're the author of that too. On the OHORN site. So yeah, check that out.
Yeah, that was created with Corey Ranger. And I think that, I run a drug user group in the region of PL. And at the beginning of COVID, people started panicking in that group because services shut down. And so we did a lot of like boundaries and what to expect and like how to take care of yourself if you're supporting people. So that way people were able to set those boundaries and know when they were and weren't okay. I've turned down somebody as a spotter because I've said like, I don't feel comfortable right now. This scenario, I can't hear you properly. I can't see you. The video's choppy. I'm not the best person to keep you safe right now. So can I support you by calling somebody else? Helping them to learn how to be there for you, because I just don't feel like I'm going to be able to take care of you right now in this scenario with these resources available to me. And we did hear a lot in our study about people having boundaries, right? And and telling somebody like, no, right now, if you're going to fight with your partner, I'm going to have to hang up, because I can't watch you if there's noise in the background and there's yelling back and forth and you're going on and off video. Like, so if you're going to go spot somebody, make sure you let them know what you need from them so that you can keep them safe, because that is key, like to being able to do this properly. You should be doing this at a default deficit ever, because you're not going to be able to keep that person safe and keep yourself well enough to keep going.
Yeah, thanks for that, everybody. And before we go to the poll, I just want to mention too, like when we were doing the research and we were going through this, I remember us talking about like, do you as a spotter have an overdose plan? And I was like, I never even thought of that. Like, what would I do if how would I react? And, so my drug user instincts kicked in and I was like, well, I've dealt with lots of traumatizing situations. I've been unfortunately in situations where I've seen friends of mine die from overdose in my presence because, EMS took way too long to respond. These are the things that we've been dealing with since the beginning of the drug war. But, even in my life in the early 2000s, and long before there was naloxone, we were all responding to overdoses before there was a mechanism to have to respond to overdoses. So unfortunately, a lot of us here have responded to overdoses long before we had the tools. And so, that's worth talking about as well, because, personally myself, who does spotting with individuals, I've never thought about what I should think about for a safety plan for myself if something went wrong during the spotting call. And so that's something that each of us sort of have to talk about for ourselves. Like, what is it I'm going to do for self-care if this doesn't go right? What if somebody doesn't respond in time? What if EMS, sometimes in rural communities, it takes a long time for emergency health services to respond. So these are other things that people really have to take in consideration. And so this video and our cartoons give you sort of an outline for it, but there's other issues that you need to unpack personally when you're offering the service, and sort of think about what those may be. Like, how do I have self-care? When do I know that I can't take on, or am I taking on too much? right? And how will I respond? What am I going to do beyond that if something goes wrong? And so these are all things that through an informal service that we've had to talk about, and we talked about it in the research project. And I don't think it was until I was talking to Natalie and Melissa when I was doing my own interview from my own perspective, when that was given to me, that I was like, oh shit, I never ever thought about that. I was like, I don't know, I've been through really bad situations. I've been criminalized, oppressed, and I've been through this many times. But then afterwards, when I left, I thought, shit, I really got to think about my own self-care in this when I'm doing this, and how I'm going to respond as an individual, how I am going to recover if something, or not recover, but how am I going to have self-care and wellness beyond a good response, right? We also have to think about the negative responses. And I saw you come back on camera there, Natalie. So I think, did you want to add to that?
I think the last thing that I want to say about this is we heard a lot of people who are in quote unquote peer positions that are doing this off the sides of their jobs. So when you hire somebody from community who's a drug user, you hire them to hand out harm reduction supplies. As drug users, we've always taken care of ourselves and our community members. And so people who are often in these peer positions take on a lot more than we pay them for. And we need to also recognize when we're building plans, programs, services, and putting peers in this position where they're now the link to safety or harm reduction or risk management in community. What is it that they're taking on? And how can we better support them? It's not enough to say like, well, that's not their job. They choose to do that. We need to build these things that occur naturally when you hire somebody from the community to be that person, that link in the community. We need to think about all the other stuff that happens within their roles and be able to create supports, as often peers don't have access to EAP. They don't have access to any kind of benefits. And they're not paid well enough to go get themselves a counselor or therapy or go get a massage, so we need to start thinking about those things as well for all the service providers and operators of programs who are on this call and have, peers working for them.
Great points, Natalie, because I think we often think that when we, as people who currently are formally use drugs, that we leave our 9-to-5 shift, that our shift ends. It does not end, because we are people who either currently or formerly use drugs, and we are part of our own community. And so it becomes like a natural practice is to care for people in our community, because we know historically institutions, governments, and other, mechanisms have not been there to protect us. We've learned the hard way that we are here to protect ourselves. And now it's time for the system to really recognize that that's what we're doing and be able to give us the resources to be able to respond in a way that aligns with our community instead of shifting us into formal structures and services, because they don't work for everybody. And we have to understand that, because there are barriers to institutionalized services. And I think Shay's going to tell me if I don't go to the poll results right now. So Shay, if you'd like to show us the poll results, results, sorry, lost my words. So it looks like, I think Shay, you said we had 100% of people respond. That is like epic. Oh my God, this is the best response we've had thus far. So look, I think our highest responder is it outside of Canada? No. Oh, wow. Close to, no, 17% British Columbia. 15 or 53%, I will answer in question below. Where do you live? Wow. Ontario. We have a good amount of Ontario people here. Let's see. And then we have all of the different aspects of, gender or non-binary, transgender, and all of that. So we've had a great response. I don't know if I'm flipping too fast. Can people see this, or can you all see it separately on your own?
Separately. They see it separately.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Everybody sees it separately. So,
Okay, great. I thought I had to flip through and show people. Thank God I don't, because I would have flipped through too fast.
I
Yeah.
just want to mention, I'm looking through the gender piece, and I see a large portion of women. Here, 51 out of 75, 68%. And I think that just speaks to women being the caretakers often, whether that's by choice or by, patriarchal standards that women often are pushed into these roles as caretakers in their communities. And so when we're talking about these issues, we need to also recognize we had a large portion of women who answered in our study as being caretakers and spotters. So I just found that interesting looking at the gender.
Yeah, thanks for that, Natalie. And that's very true, because oftentimes, even with a lot of the work that CAPUD does, women, we have a larger response from women than we do from any other population. And I think you nailed it right there, that women are often in a place or to caregive. And I think that a lot of people see that as our role. I would hope that other people would start stepping up to the plate also to take some of the burden off of us as well, because we need multiple people to respond to this, not just one specific gender. We need multiple interventions and multiple individuals to respond. So I guess what I'll do is I'll move on to the last question here from Kayla. I don't want to massacre your last name, so I'm going Gaharti. I hope that's right. This is great, but what I've seen with many people is that there is a fine line between being on the nod and overdosing. I'm worried that people will be scared that the person they asked to spot may not know the difference, and it could make people hesitant. So I'll ask you guys, the panelists here, if you guys would like to speak to that. Cassandra? Oh,
Go ahead, Cassandra.
No, I had a thought when that came to mind, because I was actually in a situation where someone else in the room, I was at work, someone else in the room thought that a client was overdosing in a drop-in, but they were sleeping. And as we move closer to them, and then I was kind of pointing out to the person, like, these are the indicators that the person's asleep, we had the ability to do that in person. So that's definitely like a huge consideration when you're thinking about what are other indicators that you can discuss when you're developing your safety plan with the person, and even asking them, like, when do you want me to call 911? Because that just might be the go-to, but I'll pass it on to Matt and Nat to respond to.
The Matt, Nat, and Nat. There's Nat, and Matt. Anyway, go ahead, Nat.
Cassandra, that was a great point. And I was going to say, like, when I'm responding to somebody in person, it's always, if they can't respond to me, right? If I know they just use drugs and they can't communicate with me, I'm, providing naloxone or rescue breathing. And, I think it's really important in your overdose response plan to have those indicators, as you mentioned, like, what are the indicators that are going to make me call the person that may be closer to you, if that's kind of, or what are the indicators that are going to make me call EMS services? But I think, yeah, and we mentioned this a few times, but only committing to things that both parties feel comfortable with.
I think Matt and Cassandra hit the nail on the head. Oftentimes when I'm spotting for somebody, I'll say, okay, tell me what an overdose looks like for you, so that I know what is an overdose and what isn't. And I'll say to them, I'm going to do my best not to have to make that call. But if I'm frightened, I would rather, call somebody than not, because the opposite is you pass, right? And so I think that we need to work together to create those lines, right? Back to those boundaries that we talked about. So I do think that Cassandra and Matt, I'm just reiterating what you guys said, but yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with you guys, because I'd rather somebody be pissed off and alive than not and dead, right? And so why I say that is because I was the provincial coordinator for our naloxone pilot here in Nova Scotia. And so, when we do this, when we go around, we'd explain the difference of what nodding off looks like and what an overdose looks like. But even myself, as somebody who used opioids for many years back in the day, I can remember being on the nod so bad when somebody would bring me to it, I'd be like, I get so pissed off. It's like I didn't understand why they were worried. Now, on the other side of that, I do understand why there is a worry, because there is a fine line between nodding and actually overdosing. And I would say that is when you're non-responsive. So if you can't, and it's hard virtually to do that, because in person, you can rub their sternum. You can make this underneath their nose. You can check if they're breathing. You can check heart rate, even and pulse. So all of those things are out the window when you're doing this virtually. And so you really have to rely on your own instincts. And I think our video demonstrates that, because at one point when Natalie and Cassandra are going through it, Natalie seems like she's like, I can't hear back from her. I need to, you know what I mean? And it keeps pressing and pressing to ensure that there's a response. And when there is no response, calls the safety person that they've recognized. And when that doesn't work, when they can't be there quick enough, then the next two is EMS. And so that's all part of the overdose plan. But I would agree, it is a different situation than responding to somebody in person than it is virtually. And those are all things that we all have to take into consideration when we're developing our own overdose response plan with each individual about talking through those things. And I saw you come back on, Cassandra. Did you have anything to add to that?
No, I didn't have anything to add.
Okay. Yeah, so we still have some more time. I mean, geez, I think we're a half hour early almost at this point. So if people want to ask more questions, let me see if something else came through. No, I just answered that last question. So if anybody has live questions they want to ask, they can put it in. I can bring you in live and you can ask a question live if you like. I mean, that's always an option too, because then you can have face-to-face interaction with us. And we love to be engaging with people here at Stimulus. So if anybody
I wonder if we can maybe show the comic. Is that possible? Because it's obviously the comic is done in color, but when we're thinking about printing at our organizations, to be able to support people to get this information out in community for people who, don't jump onto a Zoom call at 2 p.m. to watch harm reduction based knowledge exchange stuff. This was meant to be able to print, distribute in community, get to people, as well as other materials that you can find, like Cassandra said in the chat. It's been placed on the ORN website. This is just like another resource to go out into community and support people to be able to understand, how to do spotting.
Yeah, and that's very important, Natalie, because we understand too that there's people that have disabilities that may not be able to actually hear the video as well. So I think that this is very important to get out to individuals that may have hearing issues as well, that may not be able to partake in these types of formats. But I think this is a very good way to be able to give to people that are a very good comic strip that explains the whole thing over again of what to do in this situation. So it's reaching different demographics of individuals as well. And I think we put a link in the chat to this as well. So, I mean, this is really, we'd love you guys to take this into your if there's organizations here and be able to hand out. I mean, as always, if there's any questions about any of this, you can certainly reach out to the team or at admin at CAPUD.ca as well. And then we could, send you to the right individual to speak to at that time. But really, all in all, this has been a really great project that has come, about with a lot of people. I mean, at the University of Toronto, as I said earlier, and you can see all the names here done. Oh, Shay just took it off the screen as I was going through the names. But anyway, as I said earlier, the University of Toronto, as well as members from Katie, Corey, there's us from the community, CAPUD, Dillian Kula, Mary Luganong, Ahmed, and I always pronounce his last name wrong, so I'm not even going to go there. And Patrick McDougall, and obviously Carol Strike, who's been amazing throughout this whole project with us, as well as the illustration. I think I mentioned it earlier. I'm having a hard time seeing, somebody just messaged me here. But anyway, so the illustration was provided by Sarah Hartez, and an amazing, you know, I mean, I think that the video speaks for itself, and so do the comics. And she gave us lots of time to go back and forth and do different iterations, which was really great, because really important that we got this right. And so I'll let you guys speak to that as well.
I think the other piece that was really important about the project was that it was really led by people who use drugs. So, you know, Natasha and Matt worked with Carol. I was hired on as a researcher, and really from the very beginning to the end, people who use drugs were able to like mold this. Oftentimes, you know, when we think of academia, it's not accessible to people who use drugs for, you know, reasons around financial disparities. Going to school costs a lot of money. And this was a great opportunity to be able to not only create these materials, but also bring people into a setting that often isn't accessible to us. We were able to understand, you know, I learned a lot about research and was able to help support like reframing the questions, because even just sometimes when you ask a question in a certain way, it becomes a barrier to answer. You know, I've also, when I talk about spotting, had people ask me like, what happens if you hear a child in the background? You know, we heard about people spotting people in parks, right? Which are often settings where there's other people around that aren't a part of the interaction of using drugs. And so I just also wanted to make that note. I think that this project was really thoughtful and molded to be able to go into community. We got some really honest answers. I spoke about the peer position. We heard from peers who on in off hours, like satellite program workers, who in off hours in their own buildings are now overdose response like workers for their community members. So I just, you know, really wanted to hit home about the fact that people who use drugs were put in a leadership role in this project, which created like really open conversations. And I wanted to thank everybody who answered and participated in our study. If they're on the call, thank you for answering our questions, being so open and honest with us, and letting us understand the experiences that you face in community, which are often traumatizing and hyper personal. The interaction of using drugs is something that is really personal and intimate. And so I would just, yeah, like to thank everybody that was a part of this project and molding it and responding to the questions.
Yeah, and Shay was just showing the, you know, there's a couple people that asked to see the results again. So yeah, please take your time and seeing who responded. I think Matt pointed out earlier that 32% of our respondents were people who use drugs. I mean, wow, we couldn't get a better turnout than that. But I mean, it really speaks to the community that we have, even here in Canada, and then across the world for that matter, because, you know, we also have the Pan-American Drug User Activists, which is a Pan-American organization of people who use drugs and activists that fight alongside of us as well. So, oh, I think I see another question coming in. No? Oh, that's a zero law enforcement. That's always a good day. I think somebody else asked about the Good Samaritan Act earlier. And so, yes, if somebody's responding to an overdose, I mean, you should certainly check out the Good Samaritan Act in your area. But, you know, this is a mechanism to respond to overdose. You know, I think we've looked into that. I think Carol specifically looked into that. I don't know if she wants to speak to that or come into the Zoom meeting and sort of talk about the information she had, or if you do, Natalie.
So I think that when we went and looked at the Good Samaritan Act, we recognized that there is some complexity province to province. And so the most important thing is to just make sure that you're giving out relevant information to the area that you're in. Yeah, and there's a question that came in that's from Tanner. Do you think that the service can be used by other types of drug users, such as those using psychedelic compounds like DMT? And I think that that's yeah, we've also had questions come in about MSM, so men who have sex with men, and how party and play plays into this. And this might not be exactly what it looks like. I have worked a little bit with the GSMH around what spotting looks like in those communities. There are party and play like Zoom calls that occur. And so it's about having those conversations about like what happens if somebody goes down, who's going to be that person. Do we have somebody on the call that's like a spotter and is going to make sure to check in with people as the call goes on, right? So it's all about adaptation to make sure it makes sense in your community and it makes sense in the substances that are being used as well as who is using them.
Thanks for that. I think we have a couple more questions come in. From Nathaniel, it says, I was thinking about spotting people who are not at a fixed address or in a house. Are there specific systems for that? And so I'll let everybody answer here to the informal aspect of it, because again, we're not speaking to formal services. This is strictly about the informal.
I know we heard from one participant that really made some great points on this subject, and it was something that we use in the video around like naming the closest intersection that they are at. And I know in BC, all the alleyways have kind of names that you can kind of say, they're in the alleyway behind the the Dr. Peter Center, kind of, there's like all these so you need to provide a signifier, right? So if it's like, the Walmart close to Yonge Street behind the garbage cans, right? And I think, you just need to provide something that emergency services will be able to pick up and go right to, and that's not too broad of a area that they're going to be combing through looking for somebody.
Yeah, Cassandra, did you want to add? I was looking at the chat and reading somebody else's name. I apologize.
That's okay. I didn't have much to add to what Matt said, but it also, I had a thought around some of the COVID isolation hotels and folks saying that they're more comfortable letting someone else know that's, let's say, in another room, but if they're using in a room that's empty or another space that's not known as theirs, how they could let someone know. So sometimes you do have to have conversations with folks because their location changes, and about how they can communicate their location to you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, like, I think even in the video, it sort of says like what internet or which intersection are you near, or landmark, or so if people don't have a fixed address, they just have to, obviously tell us at the beginning of the spotting intervention and let us know what is the closest landmark, what is the closest road, so that if the emergency health services or a person that you choose to respond instead of the emergency services has an exact way to locate you, because certainly we don't want to put further barriers on people that are unhoused or living rough. That is not the intention of this. This is to be very accessible and a very, I'd like to say, I don't down in the dirt, but I mean like person to person, people who use drugs like manner. I'll let you go, Natalie.
So yeah, I think that we heard in a couple of the interviews, folks making sure, like, if I'm not from your community, that I would identify that and I would ask questions. So if I'm spotting for somebody in Alberta, I would say to them, I don't know that park. How do I tell EMS? Like, I don't know where you are. I've never been there. I don't know how to tell them to find you. You tell me what I need to say to them. And so that obviously also came up in the discussions around where people are at physically, location.
Yeah, and so we're at 3:37. Do we have any other questions here? No, we're all over our questions. Oh my God, we have an amazing a group of people today. They fired us questions and that was it. Go ahead, Shane.
Hey, Natasha, there actually is a question, and Makiki is just being brilliant and putting it in the wrong spot.
Oh, okay.
In more than one way. Their question is, as someone engaged in the chemsex PMP scene in those contexts, it's great to have someone within the situation who is dosing GHB specifically at a different time than the others. However, no OD response for GHB. The question is will this work for other types of drugs? Which is also Tanner George's question.
I would think yes, and that's why we have like even booty bumping and that into the video as well, right? So we try to be very inclusive of that and understand different types of drug use needs. I'll let Natalie go because you came back on camera, so you.
So I think even just as the study team, we tried to make sure that we were connecting with different communities to be able to understand the context in which they were working in. So different services like connecting with like the GMSH and seeing how our research study could support some of the work that they are doing in their own communities. And I'm not the right person to spot somebody in a PMP scenario, but I would hope that the person that is spotting within that scenario also has a great understanding of the substances that are being used and the methods in which they're being used and the, I guess, indicators of a problematic or crisis situation, right? So I think it's about being able to collaborate with different community leaders to be able to see how we can support each other to be able to create the best plans possible in those spaces. But yeah.
And I see that she left another comment, says, yeah, I'm thinking of the point that I'm trying to make is that sometimes the party will go on once the guest leaves. So having a spotting scenario like presented here will totally work. And I agree. And if you look back into the video, if you get a chance to watch it afterwards, when sort of in the beginning, we talk about, what type of drug use you're using, the type of mechanism or the type of ingestion mode that you're having, as well. Another thing to ask is what type of drugs have you used before this? Because these are all indicators of what overdose can look like, because it isn't just what you're using in present, it can also be what you've used previous. And if there hasn't been enough time elapsed, those drugs that they've taken previously could also heighten their risks for overdose. And I would say likely for this scenario, if they're leaving afterwards, if they're not using any newer drugs, I'm not going to say that they're not at risk for overdose, but generally there's a window of when you're really high risk for overdose, and is when you ingest substances within a certain hour. So that if I was to take methadone and 4 hours later, I took like a handful of benzos while my methadone was peaking, that would put me at great risk for overdose. So different drugs have different, time of action, length of action, and as well as the route of administration also is, part of the reason why people overdose. I don't know if anybody else would like to speak to that. All right. I'm trying to look at that.
I just also want to thank, while I was doing the thank yous, I didn't mention Melissa Perry, who coordinated all of this research and was so great at working with me and Matt, Natasha, and everybody on the team, Cassandra, Corey. Melissa had a huge task of wrangling cats throughout this whole project and making sense of everybody's points. And I had an amazing time working on this project. And I think a lot of that has to do with who was on the project, who was leading, as well as, how vulnerable community was with us in giving their responses. So thank you, Melissa. And thank you, Carol, for bringing me on, and Natasha and Matt for creating this opportunity to be able to work on this.
Thanks for that, Natalie. And you know what, I remember when we were first doing the scripts, this is hilarious. So that we all met as a team to look at the different scripts, and then all of the scenes came together, but we had quite a few good laughs as we were looking, because it seemed like the Corey character was looking more distraught about the video. And so Corey Ranger is a friend of ours. He's a RN. And so like all of us are like picturing Corey, the RN, like losing his hair, and his hair standing up. He's getting like more distracted. Anyway, it was one of the most epic meetings that we had, because I don't think any of us, Patrick McDougall, I mean, everybody that was here, we laughed from the beginning of the video, or the beginning of going through scene by scene, all the way to the end. Like literally my cheeks were hurting and my stomach was hurting while we went through that. But all in all came together because Sarah, who did our animation, pulled it all together for us at the end. But it was like sort of one of those middle phase moments when you're looking at somebody going, oh, like Corey looks kind of different as the scenes progress. And knowing Corey, I would hope that he didn't start losing hair halfway through a call. So I just had to mention that. It's been an amazing project to work with all of these individuals. And yeah, if anybody has any more information that they would like to reach out about, please don't hesitate to do so. You know, we can put, I don't know, Shay, we could probably put like follow-up emails into, I don't want her to kill me, in the survey, maybe, or should I just put it in the chat? Probably the chat. Yes, okay. I didn't want to disrupt all of that. And yeah, I think before the end of this, I mean, you know, when we think about this, I'm going to kick it off to Matt in a second to do a moment of silence, but just as important as that is that we, as we honor the land that we're on, we also like to dedicate our work to those that we have loved and lost, to the, you know, current toxic drug supply, and which is, you know, predominantly because of the war on drugs, which, as we all know, really isn't a war on drugs. You can't put drugs in jail. You can't harm people who are the drugs that we use. The war is on us, and therefore we are the ones in the community that have to respond to this in maybe some unconventional ways. And so we also rededicate this work to the ones that we've loved and lost. And so then I will kick this off to you, Matt, for a moment of silence.
Thank you, Natasha. And I think, yeah, it's always so important when we're talking about drug use and we're working with the drug using community to really have this moment of silence, just so we all can reflect and debrief after a great meeting like this. So we're going to take a moment of silence to reflect and respect everyone who has lost their lives due to failed drug policies. Words cannot express the tremendous amount of grief we have all experienced over this tragedy of this overdose crisis that has stemmed from the criminalization of drug use. As a community, we continue to mourn, more so since the response to the COVID-19 pandemic has shown a light on the health disparities people who use drugs experience on a daily basis. Nonetheless, we continue to fight because we are resilient and refuse to give up. People who use drugs do not have a lot of allies. We need all of the help and support we can get. Building healthy working relationships with local, provincial, and federal organizations that work with people who use drugs is vital for us to continue and sustain support for one another as we fight for long-term policy change. We commend the heroic actions and courage of drug users who are on the front line and have been on the front line since long before COVID-19. Please join us in a moment of silence, thinking of all the lives lost due to drug policy related deaths, and let us remember that these lives, as we continue to work within a field that is fighting against anti-Black or anti-Indigenous racism, homophobic or transphobic ideology, and the plain moral perception that society thinks people who use drugs are bad. We know nice people who use drugs, and some of us are those nice people. Let's remember the ones we lost. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so before we jet off, I just have a few wrap-up things. So I really appreciate everybody's engagement today, and given how much time we all spend online these days, it's really great to have you all show up to our Stimulus Connects, and for, you know, the constant engagement with the stimulus programming in general. At the end of the event, you're going to be invited to fill out a 1-minute evaluation survey. Yes, an evaluation survey. So please do fill it out. We need it for our funders, and we are very fortunate to have funding through the Substance Use and Addiction Program. So we have to make sure that we're meeting our obligations. So please fill out the survey. Thank you in advance for your feedback. We really appreciate it. Again, please fill out this. Today's recording will go up on the stimulus website, perhaps not right after the video or right after the meeting, but it will be up within what, 24 hours, Shay? Just give me a head nod. Yeah, okay. And thank you to our speakers. Amazing panel. I'm so proud to sit here with all of you today. Everybody here has amazed me day after day, time after time we talk, and the amazing conversations that we've had throughout this research project, to me, has been one of the most fulfilling pieces of this work, to hear everybody's perspectives and work together. Also, I'd like to say thanks to Nick for his simultaneous interpretation. He's a rock star. Woo, woo. Thanks, Nick. You're amazing. And we've already done the moment of silence. And yes, just thank you to everybody for attending, and hope to see you at our next one. And we will have some great, crazy drug policy initiative for our next one as well. So hope to see you at the next one. Take care, everybody, and have a great day. And I'd like all the panelists to stay just so we